Okay, let's see that this is working. Let me just check that everything is actually behaving correctly. Just here. Okay, yes, the live indicator is on. Excellent. Hear me? Oh, I just got told that several people connected into the chat. So hi everybody. Hey Tish, how are you doing? Welcome to Portsmouth. Hope you're doing really good. It's incredibly busy. I was not expecting it to be this busy, guys. I'm actually a little bit taken by surprise, to be honest. Hey Trista, how are you doing? Thank you so much for joining us. Hey Nathalie, welcome. How are you? Hey Adrian, nice having you here. Well, I think we have about less than a minute to get started properly, so we'll be rolling in just a moment. Hey Helen, how are you? Thank you so much for joining us in Portsmouth. It's an insanely busy day. I don't know if you can see all of these people behind me. But you know, it's because the weather actually ended up being really nice. The weather is just turning now. So we have been very lucky after having to postpone this tour 2 times. We've been very, very lucky to be able to do this. It's actually, I can't complain. It's a really lovely spring day. The wind is just changing now and it's gonna bring the rain, but the rain will not arrive until like midnight, so we are good. And I think it's time to get started. Oh, excellent! With the cats. Oh, that's great. Yay, amazing. Well, thank you so much everybody for joining in there. And we have to actually get started. It's time to get started. So hi everybody. Welcome to this new tour in Portsmouth. In case you don't know me, my name is Dr. Lilian Céspedes González, and we are here in the city of Portsmouth after 2 attempts of doing this winter. Jeannie, hi, how are you doing? Welcome. And well, we are gonna try and get through as much of the old Portsmouth as we can, because there is actually a lot of people in here, like I was just mentioning, which is quite surprising. So I'm gonna turn the camera around and start showing you Portsmouth in just a second. Hey Sam, thank you so much for joining us. And well, here we go. Just flipping the camera now. Awesome. Well, welcome to Portsmouth, guys. We are right by the edge of the Spinnaker Tower, but since I'm literally right underneath it, I'm gonna move away in just a few moments just so we can see it properly. But this is literally just the little quay in Gunwharf. And Gunwharf is, well, normally not this busy, but as I turn in just a second, you're gonna see that there is hundreds of people out here today. Gunwharf has now become an ideal place really for eating out, shopping, etc., etc. It's a really nice, cool place from that regards, and that's what all of these folks have gathered here to do today. So I'm just gonna get us a little bit into this direction so I can get enough space to actually point the camera at the Spinnaker Tower and actually tell you a bit more about the area. But in the meantime, while you take in some of the initial sea views, I'll tell you that this area is actually known as Gunwharf because, well, it actually used to be part of the Royal Navy and their headquarters, and this is indeed the wharf where we held the guns. After the war, and as Britain starts with its demilitarization of the army, well, this space essentially becomes vacant. There is no need to keep the guns in here anymore, and as a result, many years later, pretty much in the 90s, this is all gonna receive this new redevelopment, which is gonna lead into this massive commercial district, which is essentially like an American-style street mall. And the reason why it's very popular is because a lot of the shops in here are actually outlets from very big and expensive brands. So you understand. Hey Emily, hey Dorley, thank you so much for joining us, guys. Thank you for being here. And here you see this mammoth, which is the Spinnaker Tower, which, by the way, is one of the most controversial things that we have in Portsmouth. We're gonna see it a bit better because the lighting here right now is also not necessarily super flattering. But you see it now completely stripped of any color. In fact, I don't know if you can see, there are some guys up there that are doing some very basic maintenance just as we speak. Now, the Spinnaker Tower was this very controversial project that was actually originated in the city of Portsmouth as a way of, sorry, one of the boats just started up and it completely freaked me out because it just roared. But anyway, as I was saying, I'm just gonna move a bit farther back so we can see it better. But it started as a project for the commemorations of the millennium, you know, for the year 2000. Many different places in the UK wanted to have their own thing, and Portsmouth came up with this idea because the Spinnaker Tower is essentially like an observatory tower that has some of the best views into the Solent. But, well, as they started constructing it, as I get a little bit further, you're gonna see how it cuts into the horizon of this whole area. Hey, Charity, hello, thank you so much for joining us. And as a result, well, I don't know what's going on in here, it's some kind of fitness competition, but yeah, it kind of started sticking like a sore thumb in the horizon of historical Portsmouth. So there was a big outroar by people saying that it was, you know, a horrible thing and they didn't want it in there anymore, but there had been a lot of money spent into it when the council sort of decided that they would stop, and the locals said, no way, you've already put it up here, so we're gonna finish it, which is, you know, one of those things. But here you have it. Oh, amazing, Ginny, that's great. Well, for a really long time though, and because this became one of those towers that got sponsored, this was actually painted in white and red because it was under the sponsorship of Emirates, just like the cable car that we have in London. But now for quite some time, it's been completely stripped of any color in just white, which makes it look a little bit more inconspicuous, but you know, it's still a matter of love or hate. People really cannot get on one side of the argument and the other. Well, the Spinnaker Tower aside, whether you love it or hate it, let us know, because, you know, I think it's definitely still a controversial thing here in Portsmouth. What is really good about the Gunwharf is that although this is all, you know, dedicated space for retail and, you know, commercial gain, they've been able to actually salvage a lot of historical items in the area and add some other, you know, artistic add-ons, which are, you know, nice, like this one over here, which is supposed to symbolize peace and what have you not. This is one of the cannons that we actually rescue from the wharf. And here we have something which is really cool, or well, I think it's cool. You may not think so, but in one of the little canalizations of the wharf, they have this little boat, and you can actually, you know, there are pedal boats, and you can just, supposedly for kids, but anybody can get in there, and you just have the greatest time of your life in there. Okay, good. Well, I can see we have people in favor of the Spinnaker Tower. Always good to hear, because like I said, it really is a matter of love it or hate it in this town, and the score is yet to be finalized. Well, now focusing a bit more on the historical heritage of the wharf, here you have one of the original cranes that was actually used to unload and, you know, putting cargo into the ships. That's part of the heritage that has been actually kept. And here we have a couple of things that are actually very important and very nice. This is actually the figurehead of the HMS Vernon, which is actually one of the historical ships that had been here in Portsmouth. Well, it is obviously very heavily restored, so, you know, if I was to tell you that this was fresh as we found it, I would be lying, but it's a very important piece of the local area that, you know, we like to preserve. The HMS Vernon, by the way, was a 50-gun frigate, if I remember correctly, which mostly was active in the sort of first half of the 19th century. And it was essentially a boat that was in the service of home waters and then spent some time between the Americas and the East Indies, and then eventually got decommissioned. And that's how we ended up salvaging this magnificent figurehead that we have in here. And as you can see, it carries on all the way down in this case. And yes, well, I'm not sure what the inspiration is for this gentleman and his head, but it definitely has a bit of a, you know, not Renaissance, but definitely early modern Mediterranean blood in him, for sure. Well, just letting these guys with the dog pass through. And here we have the second important artifact in the Gunwharf, which is our memorial to the HMS Sirius. Now, if any of you have relations to Australia, it's very likely that you have Pompey blood in you, and Pompey is the colloquial, friendly, local way that we have to refer to Portsmouth. Well, this is a replica of the HMS Sirius, which was actually one of the vessels from the Royal Navy that actually made it all the way down to Oceania. The sculpture, by the way, is done by Victor Cusack, and it's from 1988. And on the outside, it's supposed to represent, as you see, a map of the journey that they took and different people who were relevant for the expedition. And it goes on and on and on. Well, the flagship of the first fleet, the HMS Sirius, was actually departing here in Portsmouth on the 13th of May 1787, if I remember correctly. And it was a colony ship. It was not a convict ship, but we always say that Australia has a lot of connections to Portsmouth, whether it is because of the Navy and the convicts or the colonists. And this is a way of, again, commemorating the impact that the Royal Navy has had in the development of the empire beyond military means. Because the Australian colonies are, in the later years, going to become really important for the development of, well, all of the British relations down in the southern hemisphere. And here we have now a very important pub, which is the Old Customs House. But this was not always a pub, obviously. The Old Customs House is actually a 19th century building, which was the storekeeper for the HM Gunwharf here in Portsmouth. And it became the captain's office, as well as the administration office for the HMS Vernon in the sort of first half of the 20th century. The building is actually in a pretty decent state of repair, all things considered, because, well, I will explain in a few moments what happened in this town during the war, but it's a miracle that it is standing as it would have been back in the day. As you can see now, it's a very popular pub. It has a beer garden at the front and at the back, and, well, it is just as well attended as it would have been back in the day, let's just say. And now we are approaching a very important and a very special monument, which for us here in Portsmouth probably holds the most, not just historical significance, but I guess the most special thing and true dedication of our soldiers and the military here in the UK, which is this, which is the cover of the tour, actually. So this is the Vernon Mine Warfare and Diving Monument. That's the official title. I don't know if you can see, because obviously the support for the statue is actually underwater, but this is built in this exact way to give it the impression of the mine being, brought out from the underground into the open, clear water itself. Well, the history of this monument and the reason why this is here is because of that ship that I was mentioning, the HMS Vernon. The HMS Vernon was originally, well, like I said, an actual gunship. Eventually it gets decommissioned and it becomes mostly stationed here at the wharf for training purposes. And as training goes, they will end up developing a very specialized unit of minesweepers, which is actually what the monument commemorates. Because this is going to be very important, guys, particularly in the 20th century, right? Well, okay, hang on a moment. We have a few people over here giving a little bit of a... Okay, I've just let them go. Right. So the HMS Vernon, as I was mentioning, is going to become the best and most important place for training of minesweepers in this country. As a result, we are going to have not just the minesweepers here for the UK, a lot of the people that were actually training these facilities will go and completely turn the tide in the aftermath of the Second World War, particularly in the north beaches of Germany, in Saxony, and in Denmark. But the training grounds essentially for these lads were right here at home, because what I haven't told you just yet is that actually Portsmouth is one of the most bombed areas in the whole of the UK. London receives a huge amount of bombs, but Portsmouth actually has the second largest amounts of bombings. It adds to a total of 54 air raids, if I remember correctly, and that adds to about 45,000 bombs, which is, an insane amount. And not just bombs, because of the activity of the Royal Navy in here, of course, as part of the wharf and as part of the whole military base, Portsmouth knew that it was going to be very, very heavily targeted. So, as a result of this, the Royal Navy actually continued with the training for quite some time, and they properly closed the gate here in this area on the 1st of April 1996, if I remember correctly. And now that these lads have left, because you know the problem of being in an area with so many pubs and on a nice afternoon in the British sun is that people can get a bit a bit too intoxicated, if you see what I mean, is we have here some images. So here you can see the HMS Vernon actually stationed in what used to be the wharf before all of this gets changed. And down here we actually have the minesweepers and the hunters. And on the other side, I'm just gonna balance myself, is what they've been doing ever since the Second World War, because this squad is still in operation. So as you see, although not necessarily from the HMS Vernon itself, this is the legacy that it's had for the Royal Navy and the British Army. We actually have some of the best minesweepers in the whole world, and we actually reckon that the Royal Navy mine warfare personnel have removed about 46 tons of explosive from the seabed, which is, that is just within the site of the Gunwharf Quays and this monument. Just so you understand the impact just locally, then translate that into the rest of the world. It is honestly an absolute important thing to have them commemorated, because as I'm sure you'll realize, minesweeping is not a particularly easy or pleasant job to have. So that's the reason why we are particularly proud of this monument here in town. Well, we're gonna leave the HMS Vernon behind. We're gonna start walking towards the back of Gunwharf, if that's okay, and we're gonna walk towards the proper old town of Portsmouth. And I say the proper old town of Portsmouth because, well, frankly, not much of it is left because of those bombings that I was mentioning. It is very difficult for a town like Portsmouth, which wasn't actually very highly developed, to recover from an event like the Second World War. So what you need to consider is that the area of Portsmouth, which nowadays is a very densely populated area, in fact, I don't know if you know this, guys, but Portsmouth itself is technically speaking an island, which is actually detached from the coast, from the south coast of England. And it's just connected essentially through a little bridge. As a result, it's completely urbanized. It's almost pretty much built millimeter by millimeter, and that's why we have one of the most densely areas of population here in the UK. But back before the war, it wasn't quite like that. In fact, the immediate aftermath of the war in Portsmouth is a huge decline in population, in workers, and in everything, because, well, this town mostly, benefited from having the military in here and from having adjacent shipping industry. And after the war, that's all gonna be quite limited. So, well, this is gonna have a massive impact in the town itself. Right, I just want to give you a quick look at the luxury flats that we have in here, which, by the way, are an obscene amount of money. The top penthouse up there goes for as little as £2,000 if you're lucky. So, it's a very high standard kind of living quarters. I'm just gonna try and skirt these guys with the football now that they're giving me a chance. I wanted to show you the little whale tail here, because I don't know if you can see, because the light is not so good, but it actually has engravings of like mythical sea monsters. At the end of the day, we are a maritime community. Port towns do have such superstitions, such legends, and, well, it's a way of sort of commemorating and hailing to our memory as a seafaring community. This was done by Richard Farrington in 2007, so he's relatively new. Like I said, the majority of this area is actually relatively new in the overarching scheme of things. Right, let me just quickly skirt around the guys with the ball. The last thing we want is to be, directly hit by this. And this is actually just a new feature that they've put here in recent months, kind of a bit like a little bit of an urban garden with some aromatics and with some local plants, which is important, because Portsmouth is actually trying to position itself currently as a green environmental city and as a city that genuinely cares about accessibility. One of the, Second World War is the fact that, well, there was a quite big open plan to, rebuild the town whichever way they wanted. And as a result, they really wanted to be a functional town, which is the reason why some of Old Portsmouth, but I'm just aware that the wind has picked up and I don't know if that's gonna interfere with the signal. So I'm just gonna be keeping an eye on that, because this wind, I don't know if you can hear it all of a sudden, this has changed. It's the one that's bringing the water in. Anyway, as I was mentioning, with the war and everything that ends up happening in this town, we're gonna be pretty much a very humble community. The majority of Portsmouth, if not members of the military, is always been working class. So trying to convince people to move to this area after all the bombs dropped was quite hard. It will take many decades, pretty much not until the 80s and properly speaking the 90s, when people will actually start coming back, populating Portsmouth, and jobs would become widely available. It was actually quite a bit of a miserable community for the longest time, and it's really taking blood, sweat and tears to actually bring us back to speed in that regards. Well, as a result, the majority of what we see in the town is actually entirely modern, but we still have bits and bobs that are from the distant past of the town. Is it okay? It's telling me that I have good signal right here, so I don't know if maybe it was just right there. But in any case, we're moving away from the area that's problematic, so hopefully that will fix the problem. The big wall that you see here on our right, by the way, is the area that enclosed the whole wharf back in the day. Nowadays it's just literally part of the furniture, as to speak, and that encloses the gated community that is part of the Gunwharf residential, and the area that takes us to the ferry to the Isle of Wight. Because one of the other reasons why Portsmouth has become very important, not just now but historically, is due to our maritime connections. Apart from being a military town, Portsmouth is one of the only 3 places in the south of England where you can actually cross over to the Isle of Wight. In fact, from Southsea you can see it very clearly, and sometimes, depending on the weather, you can as well from Spice Island. So as a result, and as many of you may know, the Isle of Wight is very popular in terms of tourism, because it's where the palace of Osborne of Queen Victoria is, and it's also considered a bit of a sort of resort to engage with nature and general retirement. So it creates a lot of traffic. So a lot of people that even come through Portsmouth and that have an impact in the economy and the livelihood of the town are not necessarily, in Portsmouth itself, but going, as you see here, to the White Link, which is the entrance to the ferry that is there at the back. Excellent. Right, let me just cross in here. And on the back here, behind the tree, you can see a little cupola that is arising. That is actually the Cathedral of Portsmouth, or well, actually I lie, one of the 2 cathedrals of Portsmouth. We have one of those funny situations in this town where we actually have a Protestant cathedral and a Catholic cathedral. So this is the old Cathedral of Portsmouth that has been here since the Middle Ages. The other one is actually John's Cathedral, which is a new cathedral from the 19th century, and it's a Catholic church. But instead of going to the cathedral first, what we're gonna do is we're gonna take a sidewalk in here that actually take us through the centenary walkway in honor of Queen Elizabeth. And it's actually quite chill, it's away from people, which also helps, and it takes us to the area of Spice Island. It is lovely in there, isn't it, Jeannie? Jeannie knows this very well. It's a very special place for her, so I'm glad that we can at least walk that way. But as I was saying, what you need to imagine, guys, is that a lot of this area all around here was actually looking entirely different back in the day. All of these buildings that you see over here had to all be redone, despite this would have been back in the day prime location in Portsmouth, specifically due to, well, as you see, being right on the other side of the fishing community. So unfortunately, the redevelopment of the town has come at a cost. But this, by the way, to visit Portsmouth in the actual flesh, it's a good area to actually engage with. And as you see, suddenly we've left the masses behind in Gunwharf. Nobody cares around this little area, so we can be a bit more, left to our own devices, which should should help, because my goodness, everybody has been so boisterous today. I was a bit freaked out by the guys we had a bit earlier on, but you know, these things happen. In any case, let me take you back to Portsmouth and how this community really develops, and it comes to the point of becoming such an important area for the military and therefore such a huge target during the Second World War. We are not entirely sure exactly what the true origin of Portsmouth is, but all the sources seem to, well, essentially point out to the fact that this settlement had been here probably since the time of King Alfred the Great as a shipbuilding area. Alfred the Great didn't have a particularly big navy, but he had to have something to protect himself from the Norsemen. This is part of the traditional fishing community, by the way. And on the other side, in case you had never seen one of these before, is the it's essentially the storage house for the little pleasure boats. So the way it works is like there is essentially a set of levers. So if you have your boat at the top, they just bring it down for you that way. It's quite peculiar. So, you know, one of those things. And some of these are still fishing boats. In fact, these guys, I don't know if they're coming, if they've just arrived, or if they're just going, but they are normally out and about all day. I suspect they are just finishing up because there are no seagulls around. You can normally tell. Well, because precisely of our access to premium water location, a boat condo, exactly, yes, Cindy, that's exactly what I thought when I first saw it. I also thought it was a bit weird, but hey, there you go. And from here you also have a good comparison between the new area of Gunwharf and the more traditional Wright community. Well, whether it was because of King Alfred or something else, we do know that at least when the Normans arrived to England in 1066, there is definitely a community settled here. So Alfred or not, definitely by the 11th century, we already start seeing the development of Portsmouth. Now, the other problem that we have, guys, and I know this may sound a bit weird, is that we are not entirely sure, though, where that original Portsmouth actually was. Because, like I said, Portsmouth itself is an island. So, was it actually in the area that is now called Portsmouth, where the city is, so where we're walking right now, or a little bit farther up, just on the coast on the other side, which corresponds with the areas of Havant, Cosham, maybe even Fareham? We don't know. So it makes it a little bit difficult for us to properly recall the whole history of the area, because, well, we essentially don't have that precision, if you see what I mean. But whichever the case, what it's clear for sure is that the community started as a fishing and sailing community, and as the Normans arrived in here, Portsmouth, in case you don't know, it's in a privileged position in terms of its location in the, I'll say it, in the English Channel. Well, we're privileged because we're right on it, but that also means we're completely open to any kind of attack, particularly from France. So, of course, as a result of that, it's going to become a pivotal area to develop any kind of sea defenses in case of another potential invasion. Well, we're gonna go here onto the right, and we will engage with Spice Island. We will come back here in a few moments, but let's do Spice Island first, because otherwise we're double backing in a bit of a weird way. Well, as a result, actually the area that you see here to our left, all of that area of hot walls, are the remains of the old fortifications of Portsmouth that, well, engaged from the Middle Ages and all the way up to more recent times, particularly with serious upgrades during the time of the Napoleonic Wars. But we will talk more about that in a few moments. Now, because it actually provides some of the best views in town, or allegedly some of the best views in town, and on top of that, it is home to a few legends that are quite popular in Portsmouth and that perhaps captivate the general essence of the city in many ways. And I'm afraid to say, I know coming from Southampton this is gonna sound bad, but I don't know if you guys know this, we do have actually a very silly rivalry between Southampton and Portsmouth. So, you know, there is there's always that in there. Right. I will not get onto the dark side of history in that regards. Right. My phone has just shouted at me something funny. I think we just went next to a very loud truck, and that probably has affected the signal temporarily. If that is the case, my apologies. Unfortunately, it's part of what happens here with these very narrow areas. But here, as you see, we still have some original buildings that survived the bombs, which is one of the reasons why Spice Island, takes a particularly important place in the legacy of Portsmouth. The most famous building of them all, though, is the Spice Island Inn, which is where we're going right now. But around this area, there is also several memorials that I want to show you. Now, what you need to think about is that all of these houses that you see around here back in the day would have actually been very humble, homes for sailors and also potentially for pirates. And I say potentially because, well, the history of piracy in Portsmouth is very heavy. People want to accept, but it is the truth. Of course, where there are sailors and where there is a navy, the chances for piracy are quite high. Hey Tracy, how are you doing? Thank you so much for joining us here today. But, the truth behind all of those piracy tales is where, well, unfortunately, sometimes we need to draw the line and try to do some fact-checking. And the reality is that, well, in the case of Portsmouth, we reckon that the piracy or the alleged piracy is not as prominent as originally thought. You're gonna see now a very nice view of the area of Gunwharf with the Spinnaker Tower in the back and with the historic dockyard, which, by the way, I wish we could actually film inside of the historic dockyard, because that is the area where we have several historical ships which are still owned by the Royal Navy, and that are, well, one of the main reasons why people also come to visit Portsmouth in this day and age, because they are essentially, presented there as a museum, and they are actually really great fun in that regards. Well, let me just come in here. This is also a very busy area, so it seems that we cannot avoid the people today, guys, but if nothing else, we can take all the views, because this is perhaps one of the most iconic views here in the area of the Solent. And I'm just gonna cut. There we go. Excellent. So in this area of Portsmouth, we have heard all sorts of things, from piracy, potentially in this area that you see completely collapsed underneath us. There could have been hidden stashes, God knows what. But what we do know, and one of the reasons why this area of Spice Island used to have a sort of reputation, is because, well, alongside with the houses of very, relatively humble members of the community, since this was the area where the sailors came from when they were coming in and out of the ships, it was also an area that was frankly very full of brothels. And I'm sure you all guys know what happens when you mix pubs and brothels and sailors. So as a result, the area had a reputation for quite some time. Reputation that is not necessarily the reputation that it has nowadays, but it has to be addressed. And this is the Spice Island Inn, which has actually been here since the 1700s, and it's a miracle that once again it got completely spared by the bombs. As you see, it's a very popular area because, well, although the pub has space, the terrace is kind of taken over this part of the memorial, where we actually have several stones that I wanted to show you. So this is known as Bath Square, and here we also have memorials to many people that have died from the community or that have done something important for the town. This one, for example, is to immortalize the scene in music. So many of these people actually have musical associations. Some others are sailors, some others are members of the military, and some others, unfortunately, as you may see every so often on the posts, also victims of tragedies at sea or even suicide. Because I don't know if you noticed, in order to come in here, we needed to go through these sort of locking doors. When the sea gets really rough in here, this area is completely cut off because, well, the Solent, which is the body of water that we have in front of us in the area of the English Channel, it gets quite rough. Although it looks kind of quaint and nice right now, I promise you that all this area below us gets covered in water very, very quickly. Well, in fact, you can see where the algae are actually living right now. So in order to protect potential mishaps, the area gets locked up, and if you come in, you come entirely, under your own discretion. Well, as a result of what we were discussing and what happened here in Spice Island, it's not just the fact that this area had a bad reputation from, the drinking, the brothels, and the merry living, but this also becomes an area where a lot of inns and hotels start appearing for travelers from here all the way up to Southsea. And this, as a result, is going to become, allegedly, if you believe in these things, one of the most haunted areas in the whole of Portsmouth. Portsmouth allegedly is one of the most haunted places in the whole of the UK, which I struggle to believe, but at the same time, it's an area that has been very heavily bombed. Therefore, I can assume the feeling of ghosts around is probably quite prominent with many of the locals. It's an area that has been very badly hit due to the war, not just from the bombs, but just from the war effort itself. Perhaps in that regards, and of course, as a community of mariners, it is full of superstition. So, whether you believe in the ghosts of Portsmouth or not, I would like to actually share a story with you, which is 100% true. Arnold Schwarzenegger indeed lived in Portsmouth for a tiny bit in the 60s. I can't remember exactly where, but if I remember correctly, it was towards Southsea, which is the nicer area. Well, I'm gonna show you the other few memorials that we have here, and after that I'll share the strange story with you guys as we move back towards the front and the old fortifications. So here, just on the bottom half of the wall, we have several memorials. So the first one is on behalf of the Nautical Society for Dunkirk, because of course, although we always talk about D-Day in Portsmouth, because the area of Southsea, which we're not going to have time to see today, and we will see it another day, but the area of Southsea is where all of the troops actually departed for on D-Day. But there were actually further operations that were taken over to rescue the British, the French, Belgian, and all of the other soldiers over to Dunkirk as well. So it's important to commemorate that. Then we have the Mendy Memorial, which is a strange, unfortunate tragedy. All of the South Africans lost life in the sinking of this ship at the beginning of the 20th century in the middle of the First World War. Again, a lot of these crews are not necessarily specifically just tied to Portsmouth, but a lot of our sailors happen to be, involved in these situations. And then the last one, which ties us in with the story that I will share with you in a moment, is to the memory of the Russian writing Ivan Goncharov, who actually was here for quite some time in the 19th century, alongside with many other writers of the Victorian era who were fascinated by Gothic literature. And of course, what else do you want than a town by the sea that gets quite hazy, gets quite misty, and that is allegedly so haunted? Well, with the last views that we have here of the Solent from this side, because we're now gonna look into the actual channel in just a second, I will tell you why these people were coming here to Portsmouth to write. And yes, Tracy, in front of us, where the ships are there at the back, that is also where in the historic dockyard you can find the Mary Rose Museum, and the Mary Rose indeed departed from here, well, and sank right here. That's why the museum is right there. If the cathedral is open, although I doubt it will be by the time we get there, I would show you the commemoration for the burial of those victims. But it's also a very nice museum, by the way, guys. There is only another one like it in the whole world, which is the Vasa in Sweden, in Stockholm. So if you ever have the chance to come and visit, the historic dockyard is really worth the while. And well, now on to the story of why Portsmouth becomes so evocative. Well, already in the 19th century we have many different literary minds coming down here for inspiration. Sir Arthur Conan Doyle, believe it or not, the author of Sherlock Holmes, actually came to Portsmouth for many a times for inspiration. The sea, the general moodiness of the town, and not just that, in the 19th century this was actually a very beautiful town, because as part of the development of this as a proper Royal Navy town, of course, there was a lot of money that was thrown in it from the crown and from the military. Well, the buildings around us would have been a lot nicer, and in fact you can see here one that is actually quite old and that has it recorded, which is Camber House, which has been here since roughly the 1720, just like with the pub. But as you can see, not much of its historical character remains, and I'm so glad that you appreciate the memorials, Rose. Thank you. I'm glad for that. Well, as time goes on, we know that it's not just this community of, you know, Gothic writers that develops here in Portsmouth. As a result directly of the First World War, Portsmouth becomes a very important enclave for dun 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 seance. Yes, people come here to speak with the dead, because apparently we have some kind of spiritual connection with the afterlife that you can only or best, you know, attain here by the sea. Well, Conan Doyle himself will actually be one of the many people who comes to Portsmouth to actually be part of these seances, and we reckon that, I mean, definitely in the case of Conan Doyle is the case, but we reckon that many of these people that come here to Portsmouth to perform these seances do it because of the First World War. Now consider that, again, just like with the Second World War, which is normally what we commemorate here in Portsmouth, the First World War still had a huge impact in our town. We are a Royal Navy town. We have been the main base of the Royal Navy since the late Middle Ages. So the loss, of course, of young men is particularly felt here in this area. And as a result, these stories of ghosts and strange things happening all around the town seem to really take hold in the people's imaginations, which is why even to this date this idea that Portsmouth is completely haunted really prevails, which is, I think, interesting if you think, you know, about it all from the perspective of what the town has been. Right, just letting that bike pass. But I also want to interject. Oh, no worries, Mel, thank you. And I just wanted to interject because this is something that Portsmouth is becoming really famous for now. This is a very recent piece of street art by Pogo Stencils. And, you know, I think because the town got so badly damaged, even though it's being renovated now with, you know, a lot of modern buildings, a lot of it is essentially brick and cement, which, let's face it, is not the most attractive thing. We are developing a very dedicated community of street artists, which are painting the whole town with beautiful images like this one, like you see here. And this is just one of many others. I do want to do a street art tour of Portsmouth. I don't think we could do it as a live tour because the distances between the different murals are quite far in between, but there is a lot. So if you guys would like to see that, I would love to deliver that for you. And wonder if Henry VIII ghost comes. Well, Tracy, yeah, I would be quite chuffed if he did. I think that would be pretty important. And well, if Jeannie is still in the chat, this is the area of Hot Walls, which is an area that has been repurposed here underneath the original city defense for the sea to actually make a community of artists, which ties in with what I was mentioning just a moment ago with the street artists. We are a very creative community here in Portsmouth, whether it's prints, pottery, you know, whatever have you not. I'll show you some of these in here because I generally think they're very beautiful. Frankie Brown, honestly, is something else. But this is something that we are very, very proud of in these regards. And good. Well, if you are interested in the street art, for sure, you know, we will be hunting those performances for sure. Excellent. Well, I don't have a lot of time left in the tour. I have about 15 minutes tops. I would love to carry on, but I promised James that I would go to the movies with him, so I can't ditch him. But this is the Round Tower, which is part of the original medieval fortification. This was actually the round and the square tower, because, you know, we are very original in this town, were originally created here on the run-up to essentially the Battle of Agincourt. Several of the troops were actually gathered here to make the crossing over to the other side of the channel. And from this round tower, we actually developed these brickworks that you see here, which will be essentially the Napoleonic wars upgrades commissioned by Lord Nelson. Well, sorry for the wall and the stairs, but as you know, I am a little bit vertically challenged, so it takes me a moment or two to go up. And well, we're gonna go actually just underneath the passage, but I just wanted to show you the round tower, properly speaking, from the top, which, by the way, is also related to another supernatural gathering and incident. From the round tower to the other side is where the Navy base is in Gosport, and this, right from the top of this tower and in this general area, is where one of the first UFO sightings actually took place in the UK in the 15s, which of course was not necessarily a supernatural occur. It was actually, you know, black ops in that sense. But as you can see, this is the interior of how those fortifications would have looked like back in the early 19th century over to the Napoleonic Wars. But yes, in this area we have actually developed a thing for UFOs as well. So even though the ones in the 50s were real as aircraft, ever since then we are actually one of the areas in the UK with more sightings of, you know, strange things happening in the horizon. So watch out. In case that you're seeing something funny in the air right now, it is a plane. I can vouch for it. But anyway, here we are straight onto the English Channel views. I think it's the blue-red sky is actually going over to the other side, and you can see here the very famous but not necessarily the prettiest beach, which is Portsmouth Beach in here. And yes, this is I didn't want to speak for Ginny in this case, but that's the reason why this area we know is very important for her. And just on the other side, by the way, the landmass that you see right in front of us right now, that is the edge of the Isle of Wight. So as you see, this is one of the reasons why it's important for us to keep this crossing between the ships, you know, open all the while. We have serious problem actually in this passing that I'm showing you right now, because, well, the currents are changing and Portsmouth has a tendency of getting blocked by sand, and if it does, we have a very serious problem with the ships coming in and out of the actual, you know, port itself. So what I'm gonna do is I'm actually gonna take us to the statue of Lord Nelson, which is just on the other side of the square tower, so you can take some more sea views, and then, well, since I need to go down the stairs anyway, it doesn't matter if I put the gimbal up or down now, but this is, well, as much as it's not necessarily the best seaside view that you can get in the UK, it's one of the reasons why Portsmouth is quite privileged in comparison to Southampton. They have a whole line of just walking around the seafront, which is lovely. Or, well, it's lovely on a day like today. I promise you that any of the other days that we were trying to do the tour, this would not have been possible, because, well, it gets quite fierce over here. That pier actually closes down when the water is quite murky and quite brave. So, you know, not for the faint of heart, for sure. And here at the bottom of this square as well, I wanted to show you, because there is actually a memorial to our connections to Australia as well. And here, as you can see, some people are perfectly enjoying the beach, even though it's not necessarily hot and sweaty in here today. Right now, because the sun is coming down, we must be at about 17 degrees with the wind chill about 15 degrees. But, well, I wanted to show you this. This is the area of the Sally Port in the 19th century, so as you see, it really hasn't changed all that much in all this while. Oh, thank you, Natalie and Tracy, it's very kind of you. And here we have the square tower. Like I said, we're very original with our names, but with the square tower, you see the little knot there on the floor. That is actually the exact same statue that we have in Sydney, Australia, to commemorate the connection between the two towns, because of what I was mentioning earlier, of how many people from Portsmouth and Portsmouth adjacent areas actually ended up either in the convict or the colony ships over in the area of Sydney. And here, just on the other side of the square tower, we will have the statue of Lord Nelson, which of course that you've seen connect all of this area and of course have been crucial for the development of this town, but because Portsmouth, due to its maritime and particularly Royal Navy heritage, has always been very heavily related and commemorated for the victory at Trafalgar. Now, Nelson takes, all the glory in that regards, even though he didn't particularly, do much on that front. It was the majority of his soldiers, but of course, since the entirety or the majority of those crews came from here, Fort Portsmouth, any commemorations to Trafalgar and Lord Nelson are super important, because that is pretty much the moment when British power as a maritime nation becomes undisputed. The fight in Trafalgar is going to be quite fierce. If I remember correctly, it's about 44 boats of the British against 26 of the French and 22 of the Spanish, and the British win. And well, it's going to be the decline of the power at sea and in the actual land as well for France from that moment on. Napoleon will not last actually a lot longer after that. So I'm just going to take the stairs to take us down here. Actually, the stairs or the ramp. I'm going to take the ramp just because I don't want to risk the stairs right now. But as you can see, this whole walk is something that was done very recently to actually allow the locals to be able to enjoy, well, not just the views of the sea that you have here, but just to have space to walk. The center of Portsmouth, between so many areas for parking and houses that have needed to be, built so densely packed for the new workers that we have here and the students, because we actually have lots of students now in town. It's not necessarily the most walkable area. It's easy to walk around Portsmouth, but I wouldn't say it's my favorite town to walk around, to be honest. So the fact that we have all of this length of, miles that carry on all the way to Southsea Castle, by the way, it's quite magnificent. And in the summer, I promise you, this is completely full of people because, well, in the summer it doesn't matter if the breeze is coming through, if you see what I mean. We welcome it no matter what. So that is how the Millennium Trail actually continues over there. Before we turn, I'm just going to give you the view here so you can see how the canal actually looks like with the continuation of the fortress lines. And now, thank you, Helen, is very kind. So as you see, what we did in here is use part of the maritime water already that was part of the city line defense, and just create a canalization so that we can also filter and control our flooding. Portsmouth, well, one of the reasons why we're not going to Southsea is because they are carrying out a huge enterprise to actually stop the town from getting flooded, because the flood is so bad. We actually have about 7,000 homes that are at the risk of being lost in the next 30 years, and about 3,000 sort of square feet of conservation area, which is rather important. So there is no point going over there, because we will be completely surrounded by construction site after construction site. But this area over here, alongside with the little city gardens and these urban sort of planters that are putting in Gunwharf, has just been finished, which is actually very nice. And I think in the summer this is gonna be an absolute joy to enjoy. And finally here with Lord Nelson, we will say goodbye. So the statue of Lord Nelson is being very heavily renovated, of course, as you can imagine, because bronze next to the seafront doesn't necessarily remain. But it was put here 21st of October 1805, and well, it's, like I said, a very important symbol of the city because of that reason. And as you can see, we have some poppies that have been deposited here, as it normally happens for any of the commemorations that take place for the Navy and the military in this town. And if I do the shot correctly, we may be able to catch in here, as I come down, the Garrison Church, the Royal Garrison Church, which is that building over there, which is where the memorial services and liturgy for the Royal Navy actually used to take place in the Middle Ages. And this is gonna be officially the end of the tour. So I'm just gonna turn the camera around very quickly so I can say goodbye to you guys. So thank you so much for having a few moments with me here in Portsmouth and for waiting 2 months so that we could do this tour properly speaking. Once the area of Southsea is in better condition, we will go and tour around Southsea, because I think Jeannie can vouch for me. It's a very nice area actually, and I will go hunting for those street art murals, and I think what I will do is sort of, you know, record it as a continuous thing and edit it down to just where the actual murals are. And we will be seeing that hopefully in the next few months, because, well, it's gonna take a fair amount of me walking around Portsmouth to do that, but we will be engaging. No worries, Tish, thank you so much. And of course, remember that in the chat somewhere, you should have the links for the ways of supporting all of the tours and talks we do in Travolution Tours through either PayPal or Buy Me a Coffee. And that is all for today. But if you're around on Monday, because tomorrow is my day off, but if you're around on Monday, my lecture of Olga of Kiev is going live on YouTube as well at 8 p.m., 8:15 p.m. So if you're around, I'll see you then. And with that, take care, guys. I need to go back to catch this film with James. We're gonna see Mad Max, and I don't want him to, you know, wait for me too long. So thank you so much for spending some time with me. Have a lovely rest of your day and a lovely Sunday tomorrow. Bye-bye.